Hello, my name is Barbara Kay, and on behalf of my co-host Susan Pertnoy and the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County, I'd like to welcome you to our program, Mosaic.
Our focus today is the Palm Beach Fellowship of Christians and Jews. We'll be back with our program and our special guests after this brief message.
They say that caring for the elderly is a profession of the heart. As the director of home health care at Morse Life, I know that to be true. When I see an older person feeling safe and secure at home, I know I've done my job. To make a difference, to show compassion, dignity, and respect, it's not just our job, it's our mission.
Morse Life Home Health Care.
Morse Life Health System, honoring senior living.
Right now, the Kaufman-Backler Challenge Grant is matching dollar for dollar new and increased contributions to Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County's 2016 annual campaign. Visit jewishpalmbeach.org/contribute to make your contribution now.
Welcome back, and welcome to you, Skip Randolph. What a pleasure it is to see you.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
This is your special evening. It is. The Palm Beach Fellowship for Christians and Jews is having their dinner this evening.
This is probably our highlight event of the season.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're going to give an award, which is amazing, to Erwin Levy.
Yes, we are giving Erwin Levy what's called the Randolph Award. It's a little embarrassing that it's
you were
named
the
after
first
me.
to receive it. That's
I was
okay.
the first to receive it, but we're giving Erwin Levy the award. And because Erwin represents what the Palm Beach Fellowship of Christians and Jews stands for. He was a founding member, and this award goes to someone who emulates the goal and the mission of the fellowship, and that is to promote understanding, respect, and fellowship among people of all faiths and religions.
Yeah, that's so important. What motivated its beginning?
Well, there were approximately five people who met in Herb Lee's living room in the town of Palm Beach, and they were people who were tired of the evident anti-Semitism which existed in the town of Palm Beach at that time. And they wanted to do something to tear down certain walls which existed and to build bridges. And those five people were courageous people who decided they were tired of seeing people being hurt by this attitude which existed, and they wanted to do something about it. So they started the Palm Beach Fellowship of Christians and Jews, just a handful of people, and then they recruited from the town. They went around to the various houses of worship, and they came to the Palm Beach, the chapel, and interviewed me, and I guess I gave the right answers because I became a member shortly thereafter, and that was in 1993.
93. Listen, you are probably one of the most awarded attorneys that I have ever met, nationally, locally, worldwide. I mean, you are a very successful man. What gave you the impetus, like Erwin Levy, who was a very successful man, what gave you the impetus to try to do something to make the world better here?
Well, I too was tired of seeing people hurt. I heard stories of how people were excluded because of the fact that they were Jewish. I heard stories about how children, when they became a certain age, Jewish children, when they became a certain age, were no longer invited to the homes of their high school friends. And it just became a passion with me to try to do something about the hurt that I saw existing in these folks.
Do you think you've made a difference?
Yes, I do feel we've made a difference. For some time, I felt like we were preaching to the choir, and perhaps the only people that were listening were those people whose ox was being gored, so to speak. But now I see an interest in a lot of people within the town. And I think that walls have come down, and I think that bridges have been built, and there's a lot more work to do, but I think we've made a lot of progress.
You have some very interesting programs that you put together, the dialogue, for instance, the Sunday experience, etc. That has created a big movement here, big excitement about what you're doing.
I think it has, and we not only have those programs, but we have the essay contest where we involve local students and ask them to write an essay relating to the mission of the fellowship, and that's been highly successful. And we've involved ourselves with Facing History and Ourselves, which is an organization out of Boston that you may have heard about that deals in the same kinds of things that we deal with, and we give scholarships to local teachers to attend Facing History and Ourselves in Boston each summer so that they can bring that message that they learn there back into the school, back into the classroom.
Do you know something? You're doing a wonderful job, and you should be very proud of yourself. And you know, you have a speaker this evening, Jeffrey Goldberg, who wrote a terrific book on hatred, anti-Semitism, exclusion, and I think it's going to be a wonderful thing for the guests.
We're looking forward to it.
I thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. We'll be right back after this brief message.
It was a shock when my smart, strong husband had a stroke. His mind was agile, but everything else failed him. I didn't see how he could possibly recover. But through patience, skill, and compassion, the caregivers at Morse Life brought him back to himself. They brought him back to me.
Morse Life Short-Term Rehabilitation.
Morse Life Health System, honoring senior living.
Welcome back, and welcome to you, Jeffrey Goldberg. You're a national correspondent for The Atlantic. You're an award-winning journalist, and you've recently written a very sobering article on the resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe.
Not a lot of humor in that.
Not a lot of humor. No. Very, very interesting article. Can you do me a favor and distinguish between anti-Israel and anti-Semitism? Can you be anti-Israel and not be an anti-Semitic?
Yeah, I mean, let me broaden it out a little bit. I mean, a person can be opposed to Israel's policies, the policies of the government of Israel. You can be against settlements, you can be against occupation. That's fine. Israel's a country like any other country, and the United States gets criticized for its policies, Israel can get criticized for its policies. The difference is when you cross the line between criticism of a country's policies and ideas and move to criticism of the country's existence, or when you call into doubt whether that country has a right to exist, that's when it becomes a very, very troublesome issue. Now, if you're someone who, I don't want to go on at length, but this is a very important question. If you're someone who doesn't believe in nation states, right, who believes that the entire globe, all borders should be erased and there should be no countries, then fine, that's your position. But if you say that alone among all the countries in the world, the 200 or so countries of the world, that Israel shouldn't exist, and that's the only one you're actually worried about, and the only one that whose existence you're critical of, then I have to ask a question about whether this is something other than anti-Israelism, whether it's just coincidence that the only country you want to see eliminated from the map happens to be the only Jewish country. Then it elides into a kind of anti-Semitism.
What was the impetus for the article?
Well, I guess it's more than 3 years ago now, or maybe 3 years. There was an attack in Toulouse in France that I read a lot about. It was an attack on a Jewish school, and 4 people were killed, including 3 children. And it just, for some reason, the details of the killings, of the attack, really stuck with me. And I thought, this is happening in France. This is not a Middle Eastern phenomenon. It's not happening in some dark corner of the world. This is happening in the south of France. And I thought to myself, something odd and terrible is going on. So then I started paying more attention, and I realized that it was part of a pattern, and it was part of a pattern that, this is very typical, by the way, that the French government, other governments weren't paying that much attention to because it was just a Jewish attack. It was just a Jewish issue. It was an Arab who had come back from Syria killing a bunch of Jews in a school, and it was treated as, well, part of the Middle East conflict. What they didn't understand in France then, and they should have, is that what begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews. That's the point.
Well, it seems that anti-Semitism is multifaceted now. You mentioned you have the extremist Muslims committing anti-Semitism, then you have the classic European historical type of anti-Semitism. So there seems to be a marriage, and I mean, it's just a hotbed for...
Right. Well, first of all, it's Europe, so we shouldn't be so surprised that there's anti-Semitism. I mean, we know Europe's history. And I say this all the time. I quote a certain person all the time, Rabbi Sachs, who was the former chief rabbi of Great Britain, who famously said that Europe has given to the world lexicon of hatred words like pogrom and crusade, inquisition, auto-da-fe, ghetto, Holocaust. I mean, so we know what the background is like. But we thought after the Holocaust, after World War II, that we had left that behind. But it still exists on the right in Europe in the traditional ways that we understand, and that it has this new overlay of Muslim anti-Semitism, extremist anti-Semitism coming from people who believe in ISIS kind of ideology. And then you have the anti-Semitism of the far left, which masquerades as anti-Israelism or anti-Zionism, but it's just the latest manifestation of a very old kind of idea. So you have three different streams kind of meeting up in Europe.
Can you tell us some of the experiences you had? I know you went to a school and you met some students in France outside of Paris.
So there's two kinds of anti-Semitism. I mean, there's let me put it this way: this anti-Semitism now in places like France and Sweden, other places, manifests itself in different ways. Obviously, there's the physical attacks, which are the thing to worry about most. The attack on the Brussels Jewish Museum, the attack in Toulouse, and so on. But I was also interested in sort of how this kind of anti-Semitism has affected everyday life of Jewish people. And so I mean, I've visited a lot of schools and a lot of synagogues, and what you find is that this is not like World War II in the following sense. If you are a Jewish person and you decide that you don't want to affiliate with Jews and you don't want to be known as Jewish.
So like you want to assimilate.
If you want to completely assimilate and keep yourself apart, then you're in no more or less danger than any other European. As we know from the recent Paris attacks, the danger level is higher than they thought. But
they didn't discriminate.
No, that's not. No, like I said before, I mean, what begins with the Jews never ends, so people should eventually figure that one out, right? But like the Nazis didn't stop with the Jews, right?
True.
It just was their obsession, but they were, I don't have to tell you the history of what the Nazis did. But so I was curious, so what if you are a Jewish person who wants to stay Jewish in some way? You want to go to a synagogue, you want your kids to go to a Jewish school, you want to have a bar mitzvah, you want to go to a Jewish movie festival, you want to go, whatever it is that you want to do. And that's where that's where anything, religion, culture, anything, and that's where the danger comes in. So I'll give you the perfect example to me is in France, in the suburbs of Paris, which is where a lot of the Sephardim live, recent immigrants from Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia. A lot of people have been taking the mezuzahs off their doorposts because people were using that as, this is a Jewish so people are using it against them and identifying where the Jews live. So that's very troubling.
That's so troubling. I mean, you would think, I would never imagine 2016, 2015.
Right, you have to remove your mezuzah in order to be safe. But here's the twist. This is what some of these kids told me in this one particular Jewish high school. They said that now in some of their apartment buildings, Jews are going to other Jews who haven't yet taken down their mezuzahs, right, from their door, and asking them or pressuring them to take them down. Because the theory is that if any Jewish person identifies himself as Jewish in the building, then everybody's in trouble. And so not only do you have Jews making the individual decision, which is bad enough, but you have conditions in which Jews are pressuring other Jews to hide their own Jewishness. And so I found that sad.
It's sad
it's sad and depressing. And look, I mean, and this is the point about the future of the French Jewish community. If you have no place to go, then you have no place to go, and you've got to figure out a way to live. But this is a situation in which French Jews have Israel as an option. Some are moving to London. Some are moving to Canada. I mean, people are living with one backpack now because of this sort of thing.
Can you give us a statistical portrait of what's going on in Europe?
So, I mean, we have to remember one thing, which is that we're talking about a very small number of Jews. In 1939, there were 9.2 million Jews in Europe. Today there's 1.2 million, and that number's dropping. So we already know that we're in, let's say, the last phase of European Jewish history, right? France has plurality of the Jews, about 40% or so. There's somewhere between 450 and 500,000 Jews in France. But every year now you see about 8 to 12,000 leaving. Some come back, obviously, if there are economic problems in Israel or wherever, but there's an accelerated movement to get out. And the French government is very worried about this because they understand that it's a leading, and now they're worried. You know, they weren't so seized by it before, but now they understand.
So how effective are they with
Well,
their
so here's
concern?
here's another example of what life is like for French Jews. After the Charlie Hebdo attacks in January, and the kosher supermarket of January a year ago in 2015, the French government decided to put soldiers in front of all these Jewish institutions. So you have paratroopers. I mean, it's not cops, actual heavily armed paratroopers guarding synagogues, guarding Jewish schools. You could have 30 or 40 of these guys around a perimeter. And so if you're a parent sending your kid to a Jewish school, on the one hand, you think, good, the government wants to protect me. On the other hand, you walk to school every morning and it looks like an armed camp, and you think, this is not a healthy situation. So they're responding, but and then the other question is, how long can the government keep that up? Like, how long do you do that?
No, I don't know.
You run out of money, and you run out of will, and all these other things. And then the people who want to do damage just wait until they have the opportunity. They haven't gone away, as we well know.
No, it's such an extremely upsetting situation, and it doesn't look like there's any type of winning here. What about in Malmo, Sweden? There was.
Right.
Can you tell us about your encounter
Sure.
with the rabbi?
Yeah. So Malmo, Sweden is sort of the leading edge, or the farthest edge of this problem. It's a city that about 5 years ago had 2,500 Jews. Now is about 1,000. I mean, people have actually run away in large numbers. Small community to begin with, obviously, but a lot have gone to Stockholm. Some have left Sweden entirely. It's a heavy immigrant city. A lot of immigrants from the Arab world, from Pakistan, Kurdistan, places like that. There's a strong streak of Islamist radicalism that runs through parts of that community, and there's an everyday kind of anti-Semitism that people experience. The only rabbi left is a Chabad rabbi from Lubavitch, who has a little Lubavitch house or whatever, you know. And he's the only identifiable Jew on the street. Because he wears a hat and he has a beard and he looks like, he looks like people understand. He readily identifies as Jew. And so I called him in my article sort of the most harassed Jewish person in Europe, because every week or two, someone will throw a bottle at him, or someone will curse at him from the car, or something bad will happen, because he's walking. Not only is he's trying to live, but obviously on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, he walks from the synagogue to his apartment, which is probably a mile and a half. And so, literally cars will stop. There's a lot of people are just shocked to see this sort of person.
He's such an enigma, right?
Yeah, so they don't understand it. And he'll be the one to turn off the lights, I think. And he believes, and I admire his bravery in this situation. He believes that the Jewish community, those Jews who remain, need a rabbi. A very old synagogue, very famous, beautiful synagogue. They get a minyan still, and they need a rabbi, and so he stays. But it's not a situation. And the Swedish government is not like the French government. They don't seem quite engaged by the problem as the French government. Not saying that the French government has solved the problem, but at least now they're thinking about it.
You also refer to Europe in your article as a museum and a graveyard.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, well, so I start with a bias that I think a lot of American Jews can understand, which is that I realized at some point that I only exist as a person because my ancestors made a run for it when they could from Europe. Most of us in the American Jewish community are descendants of European Jews. And we're alive. We exist because somebody back in the family tree looked around and said, I think it might be time to go. For whatever reason, they said, maybe we should get out of here. So I start with that. I start with that bias. And when when you go to Europe now, you're struck by a couple of things. The first is that every city seems to have a Jewish museum, but most of these Jewish museums are staffed by non-Jews because there's just not enough Jews to work in the museum. Literally every city has a museum, right? And graveyard is obvious. I mean, there are the largest graveyards, Jewish graveyards in the world are in Europe, and I'm not talking about the formal headstone-covered graveyards. I mean the concentration camps, the death camps, where millions of Jews died. Those are the biggest Jewish cemeteries, and so Jewish history in Europe is a kind of a rear-view mirror phenomenon anyway. And now you add this in, and you sort of ask yourself, how long can this
But there's
go
such a
on?
rich cultural history, and that would
Yes.
just decimate the entire continent if they left. I mean, I don't think they're all leaving, and I
agree.
don't understand.
On its own, I agree. Look, I mean, why was, the countries that kicked out their Jews usually, I mean, this is not chauvinism, this is sort of reality. It's like when Spain and Portugal kicked out all of their Jews, they gradually declined as powers. There was less, fewer doctors, fewer business people. Well, it was generally not a good sign. And of course, a country that does that has other problems with intolerance. This is why the French are now very keyed into this and realize that if the Jews leave, it's kind of an indictment of French society as a liberal, open society. But yes, I don't disagree with you that it's a proud and ancient culture that is slowly being lost. But I don't want to ask a European Jew to risk his life in order that we can have a nice Jewish museum to visit once every couple of years.
I can appreciate that. Why is it that North America can integrate immigrants, like Muslim immigrants, and for some reason into society, and they function and we accept them, and then in Europe they don't integrate?
Yeah, no, that's the $64,000 question. First of all, we're not perfect at it, and we have some issues even in the presidential campaign right now about this sort of issue. But I mean, it goes back to the nature of who we are. Except for the Indians, of course, everyone is from somewhere, right? And we're a country built around a set of ideas and a set of documents. We're not built around one ethnicity.
Right.
So the idea of Jewish American, Muslim American, Irish American, Bolivian American, there's no contradiction in that. You are this thing that you are, and then you're also this other thing. But when you say to yourselves, say Turkish German or Moroccan Englishman or Iraqi Swede, it doesn't make sense in the way we understand, because these are still countries built around single ethnicities and single churches and single ideas, and so you have that as a backdrop problem, right? You can't become Swedish as easily as you become American. But then there's the other thing, the Muslim community in America, on average, is more educated and has a higher income level than typical Americans. In Europe, it's the opposite. America draws professionals and strivers and people seeking education from all over the world, but also from the Middle East and from other parts of the Muslim world. In Europe, after World War II, they needed labor. I mean, this started with Germany importing Turks to be miners, and in France it was, service workers being brought in from the ex-colonies. It's a very different kind of phenomenon, and they just aren't good at figuring out ways to integrate people in the way that.
It's such a shame. It causes more intolerance amongst.
Well, everybody's. I mean,
Right.
it's in the next time.
They're
The next time. I
camps.
mean, I feel this way very strongly now. The next time a European lectures Americans about our race problems, and we have them obviously. So I was in Malmo, for the perfect example for you. I was in Malmo, and I went to visit a mall in the Muslim section of town, sort of an Arab section, Sudanese, Somali, and it was very much like malls that I visited in the Middle East, except that you couldn't see any, I don't know if you want to call it white people or ethnic European people at all. Like if you go to a mall in Morocco or Dubai or wherever, you see Arabs, obviously, you see some Asians, and you see Westerners and Europeans and Americans. This was completely segregated. It was as if you were in another planet. You don't even see Swedish in the signs.
So odd.
And it's in the middle of a Swedish city that's across a bay, essentially, from Copenhagen in Denmark, and you could be thousands of miles away.
And a different planet.
Different planet. Women are covered in hijab and even chadors, the full, and it's really, it was really kind of shocking. So they have done a very bad job of integration and assimilation. And there's no pathways, it seems. There's no pathways to get on that will get you in a generation or two into the professional class.
It sounds like there are many, many issues going on in Europe on all sorts of levels. But one last question for you. Mm-hmm. Where do you think the future of the Jews will be?
Well, it's some combination of here and there, right? It's some combination of the U.S. or North America, let's say, because Canada has a very strong Jewish population, and Israel. There's 6 million or so Jews in Israel. There's 6 million or so here. That's 12-ish, and we're only talking about a Jewish community of worldwide of 14 or 15 million. So the weight of the Jewish community is already the U.S. and Israel, and obviously there's a lot of worries and doubts about different communities and their futures, but Israel's a fairly secure place, and the United States is a fairly secure place. So the story is not an unhappy one. It's unhappy for Europe in that we thought that after the Holocaust things would just really change,
right.
And people would grow to become more tolerant and sort of live with this. But anti-Semitism is a virus, and it takes on different forms, and it has different symptoms.
And we haven't found the cure.
And there's no cure.
So,
there doesn't seem to be a cure for this virus.
On that note, I'm sorry we're running out of time.
No,
I can
fine.
talk to you for hours.
No,
Thank
right.
you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
I have to tell you, I'm so proud of Erwin Levy for getting this award, for something so remarkable as the Fellowship for Christians and Jews and being such a caring person. Incidentally, your interview with Jeffrey Goldberg was wonderful.
Well, thank you. It's a very frightening topic, and it's something that Americans really need to be aware of.
Thank you for being with us. Be with us again next week when we have another look into the Jewish world. Goodbye from Mosaic.